Hello again. You know, you've heard me use these terms quite often, the pieces of the puzzle. Now, when you take a look at the pieces of the puzzle in regards to Andreas Lubitz, it paints a rather frightening picture. What do we know about Andrew Lubitz? Well, we know that he's was a 28-year-old, been flying for, I believe, 6 years. Started his career flying for a subsidiary of Lufthansa, German Wings. We also know that his Facebook page was taken down. Any wonder why that might be? What have we found out about other individuals that have committed horrific acts like the beheading in Oklahoma? What do we find out on his Facebook page? Well, we found he was a follower of Islam. You know, that peaceful, loving religion. Now let's take a look at some of the pieces of this puzzle. We know that Andreas Lubitz was the co-pilot of that Airbus 320. We also know that the pilot, after having exited, tried to re-enter. And he has a code. But the code can be overridden by another button inside, which Andreas Lubitz obviously engaged. The reason that works that way is that if a stewardess was compromised by a terrorist and had to give up the code, the flight deck could still be secured. So we've got one act that we know Andreas Lubitz committed, which was to lock out the pilot from gaining access to the flight deck. We also know that Andreas Lubitz made no attempt to communicate with air traffic controllers. None. And he had 10 minutes to do so. We also know that Andreas Lubitz put the aircraft into a gradual descent. The reason it was gradual is he didn't want to rip the wings off. He wanted to crash it the way he did and scatter the pieces over a very large area. He achieved his objective. We also know that Andreas Lubitz must have been a believer of something, because according to what's been reported on the black box, and I've made a video on this as well, his breathing appeared to be very calm. Only someone that's at total peace with themselves, especially knowing what they're about to do to 149 innocent people, the only way he or she could be breathing in a very calm and controlled fashion is if they were at peace with themselves. What more does anyone need to know? What's also interesting is that the French prosecutor, when he first spoke about this, said that they ruled out an act of terrorism. You think it's possible that he received a phone call from the White House? I mean, I'm just asking. To me, the pieces of the puzzle are all very clear. There's a reason that Andreas Lubitz's Facebook page was taken down. There's a reason that we're denied access to that information. There's a reason that Andreas Lubitz drove that aircraft into the French Alps. And I am absolutely convinced that pieces of the puzzle show an unbelievable act of terror committed by a true believer and follower of, you know, that peaceful, loving religion, Islam. Why else would they keep the information from us? Why else would they be trying to convince us that it wasn't an act of terror? What the hell would you call this if it's not an act of terror? I sort of told you what I think. I also told you why I think what I think. The question now is, what do you think? Was it an act of terror by a true believer of Islam? The pieces of the puzzle seem to all fit, don't they?